Manoj has a question for you and says, Drayton, which form of advertising do you think is the most effective for property investors, from direct mail to Facebook, LinkedIn, in terms of cost and hit ratio? There you go, that's a good one for you. Thank you for that question, Manoj.
So there is only one answer to every advertising question. Which the most important asset you have in business after your idea is your staff. Your staff. People always I see all this crap on here about leadership and this, that and the other, and how managing people and this, that and the other. You know what we used to do? I'll give you the best story I can tell you about. When I sold my business to Ogilvy and Mather, David Ogilvy came into my office in Soho Square one day, and he came up to me and he said, Drayton, he said, can you tell me what you do? And I said, what do you mean, David? He said, well, you're not the creative director, you're not the chairman, you're not the managing director. And I said, just as well, because I couldn't manage my way out of a paper bag. He said, what do you do? I said, I'm in charge of entertainment, David. And he said, what? And I said, my job is to make sure that it's so much fun working here that people come in early and leave late and enjoy the intervening period as much as possible. I used to walk around with a hat, with a leopard hat everywhere. People used to take pictures of me with this leopard. I used to walk around dictating copy. I still dictate my copy. You know?
Yeah.
So you keep an eye on every single aspect of your business and every single aspect you can find out of other people's business. You want to know are your competitors doing well? Why are they doing well? And most of all, what about your customers? You know, your biggest asset is your customer. Julius Rosenwald, who built up Sears Roebuck, which has been ruined by one of Mr. Trump's friends, it was the biggest organization of its type in the world, used to say, my ambition is to stand on both sides of the counter at once. Yeah. And I remember I went to Ireland a few times to buy paintings and for all sorts of reasons when I had money. And there was a guy there called Quinn who had a chain of supermarkets. And I'm always fascinated by people. The guy who saved Chrysler in the 1970s once said that he wrote a book. Wasn't very interesting, but one thing was very interesting. He said, if you want to succeed at Chrysler, he said, you better get on with people. He said, because that's all we've got around here. Yeah. So Mr. Quinn, who owned this chain of supermarkets, I said, what does he do? He goes in and he sits and he watches what people are doing in his supermarkets. And he noticed, for instance, I remember the story that he noticed that the women were shopping. They were really fed up with the way that their children used to pester them at the checkouts because they wanted sweets. Yeah. So he moved the sweets away from the checkouts. So you look at every single aspect of what's going on. My parents ran a pub, and what did they do in their spare time? Their pub was very, very successful. What they did in their spare time was go to other pubs to see what they were doing and to see how they could beat them. I mean, that's really what it's all about. So it's all about knowing how your messages are working, knowing what's working, what's not working. That's why your database is so important. Yeah, your database is your biggest asset after your customers. Well, it is your customers.
Of course it is. You're right. And people obviously don't communicate and keep in touch with, which I'm sure we'll move on to. I assume you were talking about Lee Iacocca when you're talking about Chrysler, because he's one of the famous guys who obviously rescued them when they were due to go down under. And I read a story somewhere, Drayton, in fact, that when Chrysler were struggling big time, one of the first things he did was just walk around, talk to staff, see what's going on. He went to the back, saw them making the cars, and said to a guy, how do you think we can make this car better? And the guy said, if this were a drop top, I think this will do well. He says, really? So he goes to one of the engineers and says, grab a blowtorch, take off the roof, okay, and let's see how it looks. And that's exactly what they did. Within a few hours, he's in the car, driving up and down the road around colleges, universities, to see the kind of feedback they get from people while they're driving that car. And the feedback that they get is people like this car, and that was the extent of his research, asking people what they think he should do, doing it with speed, and then going out there and doing the market research physically. So he is a very interesting guy. We've got Manoj here. Manoj, thank you very much for joining us, and Alison. And Alison says she totally agrees about your point in terms of staff being the best asset. Manoj has a question for you and says, Drayton, which form of advertising do you think is the most effective for property investors, from direct mail to Facebook, LinkedIn, in terms of cost and hit ratio? There you go. That's a good one for you. Thank you for that question, Manoj.
I don't know. There is a very good statement, and I can't remember who said it. It'll come to me. I know a lot, but my memory is, I'm senile. He said there is only one answer to, this is John Caples, who said there is only one answer to every advertising question: conduct a test. You don't know. Anybody who says they know is talking rubbish. Until people have parted with money for whatever it is you're offering, you're in trouble. I'll give you an example. If anybody who listens to this or watches this finds it interesting and they're curious about, they've got a question, I have a thing called Ask Drayton, very clever Ask Drayton, and I answer questions. Yeah? So all you have to do is drop me a line and say, I've got a question, I'll answer your question. The only way you can find out whether people are interesting or whether they're talking nonsense or not in the end is to conduct a test. So with Ask Drayton, for instance, originally I said, this costs so much, yeah? And then I said, oh, you can try it for nothing. And then I changed it to what it is now, which is, I said, send me $1. Just $1, yeah? And you can try it for a month. And if you don't like it, tell me to sod off, yeah? Well, the $1 offer is the one that works, because the free offer is something where, it's free. If you haven't paid any money, it's not worth anything. But there is something strange in human psychology that when they part with money, any amount of money, no matter how small, all of a sudden they are different. They've become a different animal. They've become a customer. Yeah? So the only answer to any question, run a test. Now, I run tests all the time. I spend a lot more time than I care to contemplate looking at the results of what we do. So this morning I wrote 3 things to go up on LinkedIn, and yesterday I wrote 2 emails, yeah, I think 2 or 3, which will go out over the next 3 or 4 days, yeah, and I'll just be looking to see what happens, yeah, all the time. I spend all my time putting stuff out, looking to see what happens. And it's the same thing with anything, doesn't matter what you're selling.
You're right. It's important to track, test, measure, and you're absolutely right. In fact, the number of so-called marketing specialists will say, do this, and it's going to work. You think, well, you don't know that's going to work. Just because you've seen it work for somebody else or some other product, you don't test the headline, the sub-headline, the copy, is a video sales letter, what's the platform? It's different for YouTube to do LinkedIn, to Facebook, to direct mail, to radio, and some. I've learned the hard way. Obviously, I've been lucky enough to be around you for a long time, and you taught me to 2 things. In fact, the first thing that I learned from you, I think you quoted Peter Drucker at the time, was that the first rule or aim of a business is not to make a loss.
The first aim of business is to avoid making a loss.
Yeah, and as obvious as that seems, and we were talking about businesses failing earlier, at the start, is they fail because they run out of cash basically. No business ever fails because they run out of ideas. The owner has way too many ideas that they can never implement. It's because they run out of cash because they don't focus on the important things. And as you've said, Drayton, they don't track and measure consistently what's working, what's not working. So that's kind of a big deal that people should focus more on. But
I'll tell you the thing that I notice in the current situation, because I'm rather a sad person, because it doesn't matter what's going on, I'm always thinking about business in the back of my mind. So we've been going around, I haven't actually, but the lady who does the shopping here has been going around to buy fruit and vegetables, yeah? And when the lockdown started, she said, it's really interesting. She said, I'm finding that the fruit and vegetables I get from the little shops, she goes to one shop, it's run by an Albanian guy, yeah?
Yeah.
So I said, very good. She said, it's very good. And she said, they're taking money away from the supermarkets. And I said, yeah, but they won't keep taking it away. And she said, why? And I said, well, because they will not do the most important thing that they should do now, and the most important thing just about anybody should do most of the time. And she said, what's that? I said, they're not building a database. This is extremely important. If you have customers, then I could tell you, because I've measured it repeatedly, the customer you've got is 3 to 8 times more likely to buy from you than somebody identical who is not a customer. And this means that other than what you sell, the most valuable thing in your business is your database. I always remember when when I was handling the American Express account around the world, they asked me to talk in New York to all their top bananas. And my partner in New York was really dear Jerry Pickles, who died about 6 months ago. He said, oh, I'll better introduce you to the guy who's the guy to talk to. He's very smart. And he was the guy, and he gave me very good advice. He said, for these people, Drayton, he said, you stand up and talk like a professor. He said, that will impress them. And I asked him about how he was involved with American Express. And what happened was, somebody at American Express said, in New York, said, this database that you're talking about, who controls it? Where is it? And they said, oh, it's this guy, so-and-so, he's got it. They didn't even have their own database, yeah?
Yeah.
So other than what you sell and your staff, yeah, your database is the most important thing. So if you're not building a database, you're an idiot. And the other thing that people don't understand is, oh, I don't want to bore people. I'll write them a letter every month, or I'll send them an email once a month or once a week. I email 6 times a week, sometimes 7 times a week. Yeah. And you say, what do you email? I said, well, I spend a lot of my time thinking of interesting things to send to people. Yeah. That's what I spend my time to. That's on the marketing side, as opposed to the business. I'm always thinking, what can I say to people that they'll find interesting? Yeah. That's all. What can I say? And then say, if you find that interesting, drop me a line. Yeah. But most people don't communicate enough to their most important asset, and they don't even create their most important asset, which is a database. And this applies whether you're a huge business or a tiny business. There is no difference. I found, particularly with American Express, because I used to handle that all over the world, that was the most interesting business to me, and a very good business. They did things that other businesses don't do. And I always remember they did things that still most businesses don't do. And you'll know this if you've ever dealt with a bank or any of these big, fat, useless organizations we all suffer from. The people at American Express, the top people, used to get on the phone and listen to customer conversations.